This is the next lesson in this racing lawnmower quick start guide. What I've done here is I've actually lowered the frame by raising the transaxle up into the frame, just as I had talked in the previous video. So what I did was I notched this out on the frame right down here, and when I did that I turned around and set the stock mount. I just moved it up. There's already holes there, and if you just keep moving it up and drilling new holes and move it up and drilling new holes. On the Sears frames, each hole, the way they set that up is an inch. On the MTDs, you just kind of have to come up with your own mount and probably drill them an inch apart and move them up as you see fit. This makes it a little bit more adjustable. The thing is though, once you get this built and you get your jack shaft in and your stiffening plate, you're really not going to change it much. So you do want to decide what height you want to be at before you really start doing this, because to lower them or change that, it actually is quite a bit of work. A lot of different configuration once you go to move it, because you'll get everything lined up, everything set up, and then now everything's got to be moved an inch one way or the other. So I did have to notch out here where my brake is on the transaxle. It was pushing on these mechanisms here, so not a big deal. It doesn't weaken the frame too much. You don't want to cut a lot out, but I just made it so that can move freely and I can get in and get to it easier. So what I want to move on to next is, since we're at this point, is the jack shaft. So this right here is my jack shaft plate. I've added this angle to it, and like I mentioned before, I'm using this quill system. It's an MTD blade assembly. Really, it's the bearings that spin the blades. You can find them on the internet. You can pick them up at the lawnmower repair parts stores, stuff like that. So this is what I picked this up from our race director. He's done a lot of messing around and figuring out some of the better jack shaft options, and he put this together for me. What this is it's a keyed shaft. There's a keyway right there, and then it's going to have the two pulleys, and what it'll do is it'll slip in here, double bearinged, so you definitely want two bearings. And then this other pulley will go onto the top side, and it will line up with, let me get around here, I think that slips in like so. Pardon the video while I do this. There. And that will line up this top pulley of the jack shaft with the pulley that I'm putting on the transaxle. So one thing that you want to look at before you really start doing this is kind of get an idea on your gear ratios, what pulleys you want to do. This machine here, I'm going to do a 6-inch drive on the motor. The jack shaft is identical. They're 4-inch, 4-inch, 4-inch top, 4-inch bottom, and then it'll go to a 3.5 on the back. If I do the same pulleys on the jack shaft, then I'm not changing the gear ratio. So it's easy for me to adjust my gear ratio only dealing with either the pulley on the transaxle or the pulley on the motor. So I just like to keep the jack shaft so it doesn't really change gear ratios much. It's there, but it doesn't change the way it works. So the other thing that I forgot to mention, I'm going to mention real quick here, is I mounted the front mounts for this transaxle as well. Now these are the stock mounts that come with the mower. I did have to cut them down, and I had to mark them and drill new holes. So, but I am using, my philosophy is if it's already been engineered by the manufacturer or by somebody on the machine and you can use it, then there's no need to rebuild. That just takes up time and resources. So I've just taken and drilled new holes, and then I cut them down and mounted them again. I did have to mount the transaxle. I cut this down here where I needed it at, put the transaxle in, put the mounts on, marked the holes, took everything off, then drilled the holes, then put it back in. So you'll find you'll be doing that a lot. Assembly, disassembly. That just makes sure that everything's lined up. So here's the bottom pulley. This one will line up with the motor, and then that will transfer through, and that top pulley is lined up with the transaxle. You want to make sure that those are really fairly close, because if not, you wear belts. And when you start really getting some of there's a lot to do with belts, the way they perform, the way they behave. And when you start messing with belts, you start spending a little bit more money to get better belts, Kevlar reinforced, that type of stuff. You don't want to wear them out any faster than you have to. So if your pulleys are lined up, then you'll get more longevity out of your belts. So what I also want to show you is some other jackshaft configurations. Now I've got an MTD blade assembly sitting right here, and that's what this is. We've got a couple of racers that really like these. Biggest reason is they come with the machines. You know, they build MTD machines, and a lot of the MTD mowers have this style, and they really like them. This right here I just pulled off of an MTD. What this part here is that right there is where the blades mount, and then this right here is the top side. The advantage to these are they're splined, so they're good grip, splined on the pulley. And then what they'll do is they'll either get an aftermarket pulley like this one up here, and they'll drill holes and mount it, they'll weld it, or they'll take like this one where he put this in the press, heated it up and pressed it off, and then he'll get a pulley that has the same diameter. This is 1 inch. He'll slip it down over it, and then he'll tack weld it in place. So you want to be able to take these apart if you need to. They do have bearings in them. You want to be able to change bearings out and stuff like that over time. But they're strong. They can handle the loads. Even these will have 2 bearings in them. There's a top bearing and a bottom bearing. And you definitely want a double bearing system to handle the stresses on it. So now I've got also an it's not older. It's just maybe more, I would say, a homemade type of jackshaft configuration. And what this is just a keyed piece of stock. You'll have, of course, keyways on your pulleys. And what they've done is they've used these collets to set the pulleys, and then they've got bearings on the end here. The advantage to these is they're highly configurable. You can just slide these pulleys where you want, lock them down, everything's lined up. The disadvantage is you have a lot of bracing and assembly to mount these bearing housings. So it takes a lot more configuration, a lot more fab than just drilling some holes in a piece of plate like this and bolting it down. And I think, my opinion is that it's about 6s. By the time you buy the pulleys, you buy the bearings and the carriers, and you buy these collets, and you buy the keyed stock and the keyways, they really are 6s. Actually, as I've been pricing things, I think that using an MTD blade or this quill assembly is probably going to be cheaper. So anyway, the other thing that I've done, I didn't take pictures or whatnot, but I did take this machine off, put the wheels on, and I set it down on the ground and leveled it up, and I'm sitting at 6 inches from the ground to the bottom of the frame on almost all of it, except for this back piece where it hangs down. Now the rule set that I follow is USLMRA, and their rules say no more than 4 inches. So as you can see, while I had it set up that way, I marked it, and I'm going to trim that off, and so my lowest point will be 4.5 inches from the ground. But the rest of it sits at 6 inches, and when it sits absolutely level, it is actually 6 in the back, and it's 6 1/4 in the front, which is what I'm trying to achieve. I want the front to be not much, but a little bit higher, so that the oil will always run down to the back of the motor. So I think that's about it, and what we'll do is we'll move on to the front end. I think that's what's coming up next. So I've already gone ahead and cut the stock piece out, and so I'll build the pieces and put together the front end, and we'll walk through it as I do it and after it's done. So I will talk to you soon.